who knows Star Trek knows these names. They were the producers and the story editor. And I got access to all the show files, tens of thousands of documents, and I put them all in these books. And there's a lot of fun stuff that nobody ever knew, and there's a lot of folklore out there which isn't true. And I'll be happy to reveal as much of it as we can fit in.
Well, Mark, we'll be back here in about 3.5 minutes. I'm going to put you on hold. We're going to get down and dirty on all the back stuff on Star Trek right after this. So I'm going to put you on hold, so don't hang up.
All right.
And wouldn't you know it, my computer just froze. Okay, well, we're going to break. Hopefully this is going to come up and fire up. And we'll get back here in about 2.5 minutes. So we'll see what happens here. Well, I guess while the stations are taking the break, I'm going to have to wing it because my computer froze. Interesting how that can happen. Something is going on today because, before I went on the show here tonight, believe it or not, we used Skype, and that acted up and froze. Now this other computer system, froze. Instead of taking a break, I'm going to just talk to everybody here for about 2 minutes, I guess. You know what's interesting about all this stuff like Robert Culp, I Spy, Bill Crosby, how they traveled the world, having the wireless microphones. That was the first, in any TV production ever. And it was so intriguing. And even how, bringing on Bill Crosby, a black person, on a major TV show at that time was unheard of. It never really happened to play a major role. And that's what happened like with Star Trek. Now getting in, not Star Trek, but I Spy. Now getting into Star Trek, I'm finding this stuff so interesting, how it came about, how each actor got their part. Gene Roddenberry, really believed in the future, really believed out there. And that was what is so intriguing. Without Gene Roddenberry, we wouldn't have Star Trek. You wouldn't have Star Wars. You wouldn't have all this stuff. He was the forerunner of, basically of that type of series. Now, let's see if I can get this to work. And then it's still not working. It's crazy. What is going on here tonight? Well, anyway, I guess we're going to come back in about 10 seconds. Maybe we're going to have dead air for a second. So hang on. We'll be back. Hey, Mark, I hope you're still there. I'm having computer problems here tonight. I run 8 computers to do the show, and all of a sudden, all of them are acting up. I'm glad we're still transmitting out through the server, and I still have you on Skype. I don't know what is going on. It's weird.
Well, I'm talking to you through an AT&T landline. And everybody always wants me to use Skype when I do interviews, and I say, I don't trust it. But I think my AT&T landline will hang in there unless the power goes out. I'll be fine.
Oh, yeah. That's one thing, a lot of people say, unfortunately, I have to use Skype, and it can go months where I don't have a problem. And it's always it seems like when I have a good guest on, like tonight, a lot of people, since I've been, promoting you, couldn't wait to listen tonight. And then, all of a sudden I figured, oh no, I can't get you through Skype. And unfortunately, without Skype, I couldn't do the show. But anyway, let's get down into the dirty about Star Trek.
Okay. Well, first of all, the thing that took it off the air, and I believe we were talking about this earlier on the show. I don't know if maybe we were talking about it off the air for a moment, but I think on your show. Most people thought it was the ratings. I have the Nielsen ratings reports for every episode. The first episode of Star Trek had a 47% audience share. Does that sound like a failure?
Oh, that's good.
It was NBC's top-rated Thursday night show, and yet they almost canceled it at the end of that first year. And they got a lot of letters, and the science fiction community kind of stood up against them. So they moved it over to Friday nights, which was not a good night for that show because it had a lot of young adults, college students, watching. And they're not going to be home watching TV on a Friday night. So NBC put it over there, which you almost have to think they were trying to get rid of it. And it lost a chunk of its audience. The ratings came down, but it was still their best show of the night. It was their top-rated Friday night show, opposite Gomer Pyle, which was the number one show on TV at that point in the Friday night movie. But it was NBC's top-rated show of the night, and they tried to cancel it. No network tries to cancel their top-rated show of the night. You know, even if it's only number 50 in the ratings, if it's the best show you got on that night, you put other things around it. You don't get rid of it. But they tried to cancel it. And it's because of the fights they were having with Gene Roddenberry over the content of the show. By the way, they moved it then. They got over 1 million protest letters, and people were actually marching on NBC Burbank, marching on NBC Rockefeller Plaza. And so and some people dispute these numbers, but these numbers are absolutely true. I've done the research. They had over 1 million people write in and march on them and the whole bit. And so they pushed it to Friday nights at 10 p.m., 10 to 11. That's the death slot. It's the worst time period of the entire week on any of the networks back then, and probably still is. And the first episode, the notorious Spock's Brain, and just to use that to kick off a season, says something's wrong, but that's the one they launched with. It won its time slot against the 2-hour premiere of Hawaii Five-0. It's funny, that show keeps coming up in our conversation, but the 2-hour premiere of Hawaii Five-0, which then goes for 12 years, and on ABC was the season premiere of Judd for the Defense, which just won an Emmy as the best dramatic show the year before. And Spock Brain beats them both. Now, the ratings were not great for the whole season, because it's buried at that horrible time slot, but it's doing better than any other show had done in that time slot for the network. And yet they still pulled it off, and they had decided even before the season started that that would be the last. So no matter what they did, it was going to go off. So what was it that just irked NBC so much about Star Trek? Some of the people at NBC were proud of it. They said, this is a quality show. But the censors didn't like it. They didn't like the stories Gene Roddenberry was trying to tell. Do you remember an episode? You may not know the title, but it was one of the first ones aired, called "The Enemy Within." It was written by Richard Matheson, who wrote "Last Man on Earth" and "The Incredible Shrinking Man" and everything else. And in this episode, Kirk is split by a transporter malfunction, and there's the good side and the bad side.
Oh yeah.
And the bad side is very primal. He tries to rape his yeoman, Grace Lee Whitney, Yeoman Rand.
Oh, yeah.
He gets her pinned to the floor. He's on top of her. Well, there's memos in the book where NBC writes to Gene Roddenberry and says, you can't do this on the network. He said, no. He's not trying to rape her. He's just getting fresh. You know, he's just going to kind of back her up against a wall, whatever, and she's going to scratch his face and so forth. And besides, you know, it's not really him. It's you know, this plot explains it. So the network went along with it. Well, you've seen that episode. He's got her pinned to the floor, and the show's winning its time slot. And the minute that happens, it drops to number 3. And there's a memo in there from NBC after the broadcast, and they write back and they say, "Don't you ever do this to us again, and we will never rerun this episode," and so forth. Well, this kind of started it off, and it was just it just kept happening with other episodes where Roddenberry was pushing the envelope, and the network was really getting bothered. Back then, in the late 60s, mid to late 60s, you couldn't tackle hot topics on entertainment TV shows. That was for the news division. And Gene was doing an episode called A Private Little War, which was commenting on Vietnam in a very blatant way. And other episodes like Balance of Terror, which was really making a comment on Vietnam. And the Enterprise incident, which was making a comment on the Pueblo incident, which was top news story at that point, about the USS Pueblo, which was grabbed by North Korea, because it was on a spy mission and it crossed over into their waters, and we claimed that it didn't. And they held that crew for the better part of a year. And right in the middle of that, Star Trek does an episode called The Enterprise Incident, which is just about that same topic. They did that episode, Let That Be Your Last Battlefield, where you have white and black, a guy that's white on one side of his face and black on the other.
Oh, I remember that.
And one of them's chasing the other one, trying to arrest him, and the other guy tries to get sanctuary aboard the Enterprise. And Frank Gorshin, the guy who's chasing him, comes over, and he's the ambassador from this planet. And they've got him in the briefing room for a dinner, the dining room. They're treating him as a dignitary, and with respect, they got the other guy in the brig, but they don't want to release him because he's requested sanctuary. And Frank Gorshin keeps talking about him and says, his kind. You can't trust his kind, and all that. And Kirk looks at him and says, you keep referring to him as his kind. He looks just like you. And they've never seen a race like this before, half white, half black. He says, he looks just like you. And Frank Gorshin looks at him and says, are you blind? His people are black on the left side of the face. All of his people are black on the left side of the face. My people are white on the left side of the face. And it just showed you the absurdity of racial bigotry, and in a very blatant way, not subtle at all. Well, there weren't any other shows on TV doing this kind of stuff at that time, and doing stories about God and doing stories about just everything that you can imagine. Spock has to get back to Vulcan to breed. He's like a salmon going upstream
I remember
spawn. That was a heavy episode for that was in 1967 in the Friday 8:30 time slot, and they got a ton of letters. I put a couple of them in the book on that episode. People writing in saying they had to pull their kids away from the TV and change the channel and everything else when they're talking about this mating thing that he has to go through. So it was pushing the limits, pushing the envelope, and that was the real problem with the network and this show. The studio, here's something most people don't know. Lucille Ball was the champion of this show. She owned Desilu. She and her husband, Desi Arnaz, put it together, and they made I Love Lucy. And they made so much money from I Love Lucy, they were able to buy RKO and turn it into a TV factory. And they were producing the Andy Griffith Show and all these things, Dick Van Dyke, you name it. But they didn't own them. They owned I Love Lucy, so they were making money off of the reruns. And Lucy wanted to have another show that she felt could rerun as long as I Love Lucy did, which was maybe into its 10th year at that point, or 6th or 7th year of repeats. And she was brought Star Trek from Herb Solow. Gene Roddenberry had sent it in. And so she got behind it. Her board of directors said, don't make this series. It will bankrupt us. We are not Paramount. We are not MGM. We are a TV production house. We can't do a show like this. But she was determined that this was something that could be good. NBC had interest in it because ABC had Voyages Beyond the Sea, and it was winning its time slot from Irwin Allen. CBS had Lost in Space from Irwin Allen, and it was winning its time slot. So NBC decided we need to get in the game and have a science fiction. So they did the pilot, and it cost $850,000, I believe, which would be like $8.5 million today. And Desilu had to share that expense right down the middle with NBC. And then NBC rejects it, but then they come back and say, we'll take another pilot. And the board of directors is saying, don't. We just threw away over $4 million. 400,000, but that would be like $4 million. And she says, no, let's do the next pilot. Well, that one they made for about $450,000. They brought the cost down because the ship had been built and everything else, but that's still a ton of money back then. And Desilu had to put up half of it. And so then NBC comes to them and says, okay, we want it. And they put in order for 16 episodes the first half of the first year, back in the day when they made 30-plus episodes a season. And again, the board of directors begs her not to do it. And she overrides them and puts the show into production. Halfway into the second season, she loses Desilu because everything they said came true. It bankrupted the studio. The combination of Star Trek and Mission Impossible. Two very ambitious shows, two very expensive shows, and Desilu ran out of money. So she had to sell the studio to Paramount, and it broke her heart. She even ran away. She went to Miami Beach and hid out and did an appearance on the Jackie Gleason show. And